Welcome to the RePsychled podcast, where we discuss everyday issues from a mental health perspective. We are your hosts, Dr. Rashonda Strickland,
Dr. LaFonya Jones-Hines,
and Dr. Nichelle Wall. Now, don't get it twisted. We're not going to be your stereotypical therapist.
What we will be is informative, down to earth, a little spicy, and vulnerable.
All right, interns, turn up your volume, grab your pen and paper. It's supervision time. As a reminder, this podcast is not meant to take the place of a relationship with a licensed mental health professional.
Welcome back to session 71, First Steps.
Okay, so y'all, we just got to give a disclaimer.
A huge one.
Yes. Because y'all know, we told you all we moved. And since we've moved, we've been able to get one good recording. I don't know what has happened to our equipment. I don't know if we have forgotten how to put it together. I don't know what is going on. So please bear with us. Hopefully we'll have it together. We'll just say in December because we've got to figure some stuff out. I think we have to get a different type of equipment for some things. So just please bear with us. It's going to sound different.
Mm-hmm. And because of that, we're going to keep these next couple ones short and sweet for y'all. Just in case there's any sound issues when y'all finally get a chance to hear these.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
So let's get to it. So as usual, I do have questions for you ladies. And this first set of questions, there are a few of them. So we may have to kind of like pick them apart a little bit. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, are you kind to yourself and positive to others?
Yes, most of the time.
I would definitely say kind to others, but I can be really hard on myself.
I agree with that. I am truly my worst critic. I have to definitely make sure I work on that negative self-talk and, things that we teach our clients, so that I can make sure I don't, because me having that negative self-talk forces me to do more, do harder. You know what I mean? So my second question is, do you feel accepted by others?
No.
I would say if I'm going to put mine as percentage wise, I would say 90% of the time I do. There's probably about 10% of the time that I don't.
I would say for me, I think it would be percentage wise. I would say mine would maybe be 70. I think my number has changed my percentage has changed over the years, but I would say 70%.
And I'm only rating mine so high because of the people that I deal with. The people that I deal with, I feel 90% of the 90% of the time, the people that I deal with, I feel are accepting of me and all that kind of stuff. But people that I don't deal with consistently, I don't even know if I would even rate them as an acceptance, because when we're together, I feel like they do, but it's an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So because I'm not thinking about them, I don't factor them into that consideration.
So I would have to agree. Mine, like I said, mine has changed. So I would actually have to rate myself a little higher now. I think my 70% was back then, because y'all know some of my stuff that's happened. But I would say now, because of the people I deal with, I don't have to have a filter, so to speak. And so I feel like I can be me. And even if what people used to say was too much, people I have in my life now love it or, are accepting to it at least.
Yeah.
So I would have to rate it a little bit higher now.
Okay.
Mine's probably 60-40.
Okay. Now?
Now.
Okay.
Versus
Way less.
Oh.
as a kiddo, it was a struggle.
Okay.
Yeah, I would probably say if I had to think about as a child, I don't know, because I was very quiet and reserved and, but I had friends. That part I think is still the same about me. Like I had a very tight group of friends. Like I always knew a lot of people. So I've always been a known person. So I know a lot of people, but like people that I actually deal with has always been small.
And I would have to say mine is like in school, middle school, high school, I would say that one was higher for me. Because I danced. So everybody accepted me because I danced. And I have an older brother that didn't play with people either. So a lot of people accepted me because of that. And then I would say college, the same thing. I danced, so a lot of people accepted me, based on that. But then when I became an adult and got more involved in different things, it was a dip. And then, like I said, now it's going back up.
Yeah.
For me personally, I would say that I have been friends to a lot of people, and not a lot of people have been friends to me.
Gotcha.
So it's more of a, it was not mutually beneficial.
Gotcha.
They were takers, and I'm a reformed people pleaser and giver.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. And this would be the last one I ask. Do you feel competent in the actions you take?
Yes.
So moderately.
So I would say, I say moderately and I say yes, because starting a business makes you go on a roller coaster. It makes you feel like, oh my God, I did this great thing. And I feel competent about what I did. But then it started going, it's like, whoa, no. Why is it going this way? It's not supposed to do this. Because, of course, when you have a business, it has its ups and it has its downs. And sometimes when it has its downs, is like we said before, I'm hard on myself. So it's like, oh my God, I am messing this business up.
Yeah, I would say moderately, because there are times where I move slowly. Like I'm a slow to decide type of person, where there have been times where I probably needed to decide on something much more quickly than I did and move much faster, which then caused a lot more stress and stuff. Like even if I knew the decision needed to be made, I just made it slow.
Gotcha.
So I would say moderately for one, that major reason right there.
Yeah. I typically believe I am confident in my decisions, but I know that there's going to be a roller coaster of emotions that is attached to it. And so I'm of the mindset that it's okay to have like self-doubt. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to have all these emotions that kind of tear your nerves up while you're making the decision. So I still believe and am confident in what I'm doing. It's just I'm going to have a myriad of emotions that are attached to it.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
I agree.
Okay.
So for those set of questions, if you answered yes to them all, then you probably are a person that has a secure attachment. Now, of course, that's not an end-all be-all, but it's just something fun that we decided to put in. So if you answered yes, it may be likely that you have a secure attachment. And if you can't guess, that's what we're talking about today. So we're going to give you an introduction to attachment. And basically what attachment is just the bond that you make with your family, with other people. It's just basically a relationship.
Yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the most important one.
Yes.
And this is a bond that's created over time. So, the person that you met at the grocery store and y'all talk for 10 minutes, that's not an attachment.
No, that's chemistry.
Right.
And the thing about attachment or the bond is that it has to be a two-way process. So if you've ever, sat down and spoken to a mother, or a father, you will hear them say, that they've learned their child has multiple cries. It can be a cry for when they're wet, a cry for when they're hungry, a cry for when they want to be left alone, a cry for when they want snuggles. They have all of these cries, and the parent is able to identify the cry. And so what happens is the parent then reacts or responds to the cry that is needed. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because then, well, I'm not a parent, but, I've heard like, oh, well, I can wait a couple of minutes because they'll be all right. Mm-hmm. That's just, like you said, that's the wet cry, or the I got hurt cry is very different than, know.
I think everybody knows the I got hurt cry. Even if you're not a parent, it's like, oh, somebody hurt.
Distressing.
Yeah.
I do think it helps you with knowing how to react to a situation, and how to be attentive to your child, how much attention to give them, when to give it to them. So if you can be in tuned in that way, that's the kind of stuff that starts developing that security within that child.
Yeah. So interns, y'all may be wondering why we're talking so much about children and parents. And this session is going to focus on the initiation of your attachment. And then our next session will talk more in depth about the adult level of attachment. But this is the most important because it's laying the foundation for everything that is to come.
Absolutely.
So we have a few pioneers in this attachment theory field. We won't talk about all of them, obviously, but one of the biggest names that we know is Bowlby. He was a psychiatrist, and he kind of, I don't want to say he started, but I guess so. He kind of
laid the groundwork.
Yeah, he laid the groundwork. And his thing was that attachment was supposed to be built with the mother because the mother does the feeding. Mm-hmm. However, there's also been people to come behind him to say, yeah, no, that's not all. So we have
there's a thing called a daddy.
Yes. So we also have Mary Ainsworth, who came in and added stages and confined the theory. So starting with Bowlby had this internal working model that he created, which was when you have a mental representation of how the child interacts and builds the relationships. So it's basically like this mental engraving in your mind or memories of how you actually develop a relationship and what that feels like, what it looks like, what the experience is.
Something I think interns, because you're getting this is like a moderate, medium-sized Psych 101 that y'all get in these next two sessions. But something that I think that fits really good with like Bowlby, Ainsworth, and all the other attachment theorists is like lifespan development. And specifically, it makes me think about Erikson.
Yeah.
And how the trust versus mistrust stage. So interns, trust versus mistrust is stage 1 of lifespan development. And that's like 0 to 2, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And what happens, and like I said, it kind of fits really good with the attachment theorists, because in that stage, that's where children learn, can they trust their world? So if I cry, are you going to address my need? Yeah. Are you going to come? And again, they don't have any other way of communicating what that need is. So they're going to make this noise. Is some now we're not going to dive all the way into like object and all this kind of stuff, because then that's getting real heavy into that's huge
Psych 102.
Yeah, that's like a deep dive. But basically, what you're doing is the child sees you as an object of receiving. So in that stage, they're learning, can I trust that when I do this, somebody is going to address whatever need that is? So if you do, then they learn when they move on to the next stage which is autonomy versus self-doubt. They learn that it's okay to explore my environment. It's okay for me to leave your side and go and do stuff. But
shame and doubt. Autonomy versus shame and doubt.
Autonomy versus shame and doubt. They learn whether it's okay to explore, but if they have developed mistrust because you haven't secured their needs, you didn't feed them, you didn't change them, you didn't pay attention to them.
You were sorry.
that, then they become mistrustful of their environment. So then this is the child that's very anxious. They, they don't want to leave you. They cry the second you leave, and they just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry the whole time you're gone. Or they don't want to deal with nobody. It's not that they cry. They just like, whatever. I don't care. I got me. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can see this early on. You don't have to wait until the child is talking. You don't have, you can see how well they adhere to whatever their guardian figure is. When they come and go, how they play with others, even if it's solo play, how they're playing with their own toys. Do they tend to disassociate, or do they tend to, as Dr. Strickland was saying, crying? So you can see the beginning stages of this pretty early on.
Absolutely.
So, just to give you words to the styles that Dr. Strickland and Dr. Wall was just saying. So like we said, Ainsworth came and created the attachment styles. And 3 of her attachment styles is the secure attachment, avoidant, and ambivalent. And avoidant and ambivalent are insecure attachments.
Yeah.
So basically a secure attachment is healthy. You can like Dr. Strickland was explaining earlier, you are able to trust, you love, you're able to receive love, you're able to experience genuine, authentic relationships.
Effective communication of needs is a major one. You may feel some type of way, but you're able to work through it and say, these are the things that I need, regardless of if you give them to me or not.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you're making there, because sometimes when people learn about attachment and they hear about secure, they confuse that to mean that you're not going to experience any difficulty. So this is not to say that you won't grow up, even in childhood or even teenage or early adulthood, that you won't experience traumatic events or negative, situations. It's just how you learn to deal with that, because you have a good home base. You've learned how to, like you said, emotionally regulate. You've learned how to communicate. Things don't affect you in the same type of way that they affect other people.
It's almost like you have the capacity internally to be able to deal with life.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the parenting style that goes well with secure attachment is authoritative parents. And those are the parents that are sensitive to the child's need. They don't do punitive punishments or discipline. And they are loving and affectionate.
I've always hated these terms.
What, the authoritarian, permissive? Right,
because authoritative, even though that's the type of parenting style you technically would aspire to have, the word authoritative
seems very negative.
Yeah. Socially, that word is very negative. People think of like drill sergeant or whatever, and they combine authoritarian and authoritative together.
So I'll just go ahead and tell you what authoritarian is. Authoritarian parenting tend to overlap characteristics with avoidant attachment, and this is the parent that is demanding. They're unresponsive to the child. They tend to use like punitive punishment. They have physical enforcement, reprimands, and prohibitive interventions. The outcomes obviously are avoidant attachment style, which is an insecure attachment. So avoidant attachment style is those children. They are, I want to say angry, I guess more temperamental, and they are disconnected.
So from people and themselves.
Yeah. It's just like it's a lack of understanding, because you haven't had real good exposure to healthy ways of dealing with the world. So then you learn to separate from it.
It's easier to shut down than to be present.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is one of those times, interns, like when we're talking about this kind of stuff, think about what has been, has happened in your family system. Because it's not just simply, while the research started off with mothers, attachment styles develop from all relationships. So this is child to parent. This is sibling to sibling, aunt to nephew or niece and whatnot. So thinking about all of the relationships that you've had, those developed your attachment style. Now your parents are the primary, they're the umbrella, but all of these other relationships still influence what happens with you.
Yeah. Now, just to add on a little bit, because like we said, attachment science theory is something that is ongoing. And so as it continues, more information is learned and, we develop a little bit more. So in the mid to late 80s, there were a couple of researchers, Main and Solomon, who also added a fourth attachment style, and it's called disorganized attachment.
Hold on, we didn't talk about the ambivalent.
Okay, go ahead.
The ambivalent came first.
Go ahead.
So the parenting style that kind of goes with ambivalent is permissive. And permissive parents they have low self-control and low self-resilience, and are very immature with ambivalent attached children. And so ambivalent attached children, they seem to be a little bit more anxious and immature.
Yeah. This puts me in the mind of the child that doesn't know whether or not to approach the parent. They don't know whether to seek comfort from them or not. They may run up to them, but then are still super fussy. And when the parent's trying to calm them down, or they may run up to and then run away. They're not quite sure what to do.
Yeah. I agree.
Or the child that always questions himself. You start to see as they become more verbal, anxiety really starts to, again, a lot of this stuff is you don't need to see it when it's, the child's 15, 16. You'll see it when they're 3.
I think that's why we have so many young kids that's been diagnosed with anxiety.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Definitely.
It's so much going on in the world right now, and we could all use some extra support. At Balanced Beacon, we offer counseling services for individuals, couples, families, and groups. If you're in Texas, give us a call at 214-396-6503 or visit our website at www.balancedbeacon.com for more information.
And so then that's when we had what Dr. Wall was saying. I was going to say Dr. Strickland. Dr. Wall was saying earlier. We had an add-on.
Yeah, so the disorganized attachment comes from a parent's consistent failure to respond appropriately to their child's distress. So they're responding in some way, whether it is ignoring them or whether it's having an abrupt comment or reaction to whatever is going on, but it's not always appropriate for what the child is experiencing in that moment. And so it makes the child extremely unsure and disorganized. So they lack a coherent approach towards getting that need met or building relationships. So it's very similar to ambivalent, but it's slightly different. And some of the differences is that this particular attachment style tends to be steeped in fear. They don't know what to do, which is similar to the ambivalent, but the fear based of it is a little bit more overshadowing.
Yeah, what I get from the ambivalent type is more confusion based. Like you said, I don't know what to do, but I'm not scared to do something. But for the disorganized, it's I'm scared to do something.
Someone going to do something to me or something.
So it's like the disorganized is like what Dr. Strickland was describing earlier about I don't know which decisions to make, so I don't make a decision at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you were saying that you were more slower to make a decision, but they probably won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like analysis paralysis kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because my history has told me that if I act, it's likely going to not result in the thing that I want or that I was looking to receive.
Yeah.
You know, because every time I went to my parent, or every time I went to my sibling, or every time I went to my aunt or whatnot, I was always met with something that, like you said, didn't match with what I was trying to get from them.
Yeah. And so the thing about it is later on, I believe it was Bowlby who then started saying that your attachment does not only have to come from your mother, but it can be an attachment to your father. It can be attachment to your coach. It can be an attachment to your teacher. It can be an attachment to your extended family, aunt, uncles, cousins, whoever it is. You can develop attachments with people that's in your life that you have a relationship with. It's about what kind of attachment you develop. Mm-hmm. So then with that being said, unless you all have anything else to that, I have another question. Do you think your attachment style can change?
Well, yes, in theory, because we are ever evolving, and there are things that can happen to us that can completely knock us off of the path that we were going on. However, there's still going to be remnants of your initial or several attachments that are going on, because no one is always the same way. It kind of ebbs and flows. That's how I think of it anyway.
Yeah. I kind of have a same kind of twofold response for that as well. I think that you're always managing whatever one that you is from an insecure. I think if you have an insecure attachment, you're going to have an insecure attachment. You may have a lot of events that happen that seem like you have an insecure attachment, but at the base of it, you're still secure. But if you have an insecure attachment, you're probably going to always be battling that. That's going to be your initial reaction, is the insecure attachment. But because you've consciously made choices over time, and like you said, have learned that you can operate as if you have secure attachments.
Checks and balances.
Right, that part. But your initial reaction is going to be your innate nature.
Yeah.
I agree. I do think your attachment style can change. I definitely think do I want to say damage? The most affected one is probably the secure, because when a secure person becomes insecure, it's like, whew. But you also then look at, but you do have, the secure person does have the capacity to be able to get through it. So it's still, I feel like it's most damaging when it's a secure person going to an insecure, because obviously if it's an insecure person going to secure, that's great.
Right. Yeah, I think the secure person has a certain level of resilience. So they may look like they're presenting with the insecure, but once they've kind of
gotten through it,
I'm like, oh, let me get myself together, and like, what am I doing? Or they're probably quicker to bounce back. I don't know if that's the word I want to use, but like I said, their resilience may be a little bit higher than the others.
Well, and I think the other thing that we have to remember is that we have to be patient. If you're trying to work on your attachment style, it's a lot of work, and you have to be patient with yourself. That's the thing that I think people don't understand, is that you have to be patient with yourself, because it's not going to change overnight. You have to remember you had a foundation that was set, and then you had life as you become an adult. You had life to happen. So if whatever foundation that was set, and then you kept having things to validate, which we all have things to validate our attachment, regardless of whether or not it's secure or insecure, we all have things to validate that attachment style. And so if your foundation was an insecure foundation, and then you had things to validate that, you're having to go against the grain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think something that's really important to remember is secure attachment doesn't mean perfection.
Right.
There's an idea that, if I have a secure attachment to the people in my life, that things are always perfect. And like we said before, no, you're still going to go through trials and tribulations. You're still going to experience hardship. This becomes about when you experience that hardship, how you're able to work through it, because you have that secure base. Mm-hmm. You have that base that taught you how to address life. So this is not about having happy-go-lucky relationships. That's not what a secure attachment means. Mm-hmm. It just means that I've learned and I've bonded with people over time, and those bonds serve my needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. So if you're wondering, like, some ways of starting to kind of work on your attachment style, is one, to identify your relationship patterns. Mm-hmm. And, you can ask yourself a few questions like, how were your relationship patterns as a child? Mm-hmm. How did you respond to the people around you? And were you neglected? Or were whoever you were attached to, were they neglectful, or were they reliable?
Mm-hmm. And remember, this is about how you show up. Mm-hmm. This is not going to necessarily be the moment that you're casting blame on someone or trying to find the person that did these things to you or anything like that. It's an introspective view of, okay, how did I handle rejection? How did I handle not being hugged or not getting this, or like, what did that look like for me, so that I can identify which attachment style I have carried throughout life, or which attachment styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because if you have an insecure attachment, ultimately at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which one or version you have. Mm-hmm. The point is that the attachment is insecure, mm-hmm. and that there's some work needing to be done, so that when you experience adversity, it doesn't lead to things like addiction, mm-hmm. or
unhealthy behavior.
So yeah, I was going to say some version of self-harm, mm-hmm. And that could be overworking. Like, it doesn't always have to be what is deemed socially inappropriate. Overworking is considered to be socially appropriate, but it's an unhealthy behavior that likely stemmed from an insecure attachment about you didn't do enough. You didn't, why didn't you, you weren't good enough, or you didn't achieve this, or you didn't represent the family well enough, or mm-hmm. you had pressure from some, for whatever.
Mm-hmm. Hyper independence is a trauma response, and that's mm-hmm. directly linked to your attachment. Mm-hmm. So you do need to be mindful that I know, especially a lot of Black women or women of color tend to have hyper independence. Mm-hmm. We have to be the best. We have to show up in perfection, and that is a trauma response. That is not healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I'm talking to myself.
Yeah, so these are things that definitely, especially once we get over into the adult attachment session, we'll dive a little bit deeper into how these things show up in adulthood. But if you sit back and really think about yourself in childhood, you will see a lot of this stuff even in childhood. It may look slightly different because you had, like an oversight at home, mm-hmm. And so you weren't just left to your own devices like you are as an adult. Mm-hmm. But you can look back and see where, like, mm-hmm. I took on extra projects, or I was the group leader and did all the work in the group work project, mm-hmm. or when everybody in the class was sitting around and having a good time, I was one over in the corner by myself, or there's all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. You can look back on if you really sit and do a really personal deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have others, but I think we should probably save them for the adult one.
Yeah.
Because these are things that you have to work on as an adult.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I do want to ask y'all a question. What are some childhood diagnoses that you feel directly relate or can relate to your attachment?
Reactive attachment.
Would you like to explain that to the interns?
So reactive attachment disorder, you see this a lot with children that have been institutionalized. So you definitely see it from children that have been in foster care or that live in orphanages, things like that. Mm-hmm. So you can have two types of a reactive attachment. You can have what's called a disinhibited type or an inhibited type. So disinhibited, this is a child that has no boundaries. Mm-hmm. They're going to be all in your lap. They're going to be all over you. They're going to be telling you everything under the sun, stuff you don't need to be knowing. It's like, whoa, what is going on with this kid? Like they have zero filter, zero boundaries. They may be crawling in your lap. I mean, it's just going to be over the top. Now, this is just not a lovey child. Like, this is over the top, inappropriate behavior. The conversation types that they may start are going to be inappropriate for a child speaking to an adult, things like that. Mm-hmm. Then you can have an inhibited type, which this is going to be the very super standoffish child. It is hard to develop rapport with them. They really want to be left alone. They don't want anything to do with anybody. Because they've learned that there's no one going to be there for them. So they really are a true emotional island. Mm-hmm. And that research shows that is a direct link from a lack of attachment. There's, they weren't held, they weren't spoken to, they weren't cuddled, they weren't cared for. They got the basic necessities and that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll give you two misdiagnoses. Mm-hmm. One is the spectrum. They tend to look like, especially the inhibited one, the standoffish one. Mm-hmm. They look like they're on the spectrum. They can look like they're on the spectrum. And then the disinhibited can look like ADHD, hyperactivity. Mm-hmm. So I would say that those are two diagnoses that can be diagnosed, but they are often misdiagnosed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The two that I would say, when I worked with kids, these were my favorites, and I don't know what that says about me, but that would be oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder.
Boy.
Bad.
Yes.
Them Jones right there.
They are the fun kids for us who like to do REBT therapy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who are you talking to? Like that's yeah, and they like it, and you can have really in-depth conversations because they know that you're not going to leave them just because of their actions and their behaviors. Those become like your babies when you are working with that particular clientele, because a lot of the things that they go through, and especially if you're working in Black and brown communities, they're probably actually misdiagnosed with these two disorders, and it's probably a lack of the attachment and the issues within the environment that they are living in. But we are diagnosing off of a whitewashed system, so we have to give them the diagnosis. But
well, if we're writing a report, we don't have to. We just have to explain why we
didn't. Yes, that is true. That is true.
So true. I would agree with that. That those are ones that come up a lot that are probably directly linked to an insecure attachment.
Yeah.
Because their environment just doesn't foster or support security, whether that's financial security, emotional security, food security. There's a lot.
Yeah.
That goes there.
And then I guess the other one that's kind of like a catch-all for trauma would be PTSD. And that's, that can be diagnosed at any age, but, typically when you have kids who have been diagnosed with this, it's going to be something major.
Well, with any age, I would also add borderline. Because they don't have the capacity to have the development of relationships.
Don't do it. We already said if y'all want to get the borderline personality sessions, let us know when we get narcissists.
because that's a deep dive.
Yeah, that one would require its own month,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say for adult, absolutely.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That is like almost hand in hand
Mm-hmm.
with an insecure attachment.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I would also say if we're going to go down the personality disorder train, antisocial.
Oh,
yes,
yeah, most definitely.
Because a lot of times conduct disorder is their first diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, conduct disorder, ODD are their likely first diagnoses. Now, I say that to say that does not mean it's a direct link. So just because you have ADHD, conduct, or ODD does not mean that equals antisocial.
Right.
at all. So stop self-diagnosing and stop diagnosing your kids.
Right. So
take them to a therapist.
yes, some people, emphasis on the word some people with those diagnoses in childhood become antisocial in adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to understand that that's probably someone who has not gotten help either. Because if you get the necessary guidance and tools that you need to be able to, have social relationships and things like that, that can change.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for the person who really don't and probably not aware either, self-aware.
Mm-hmm. And I would expand that to say any of the personality disorders are likely a result from an insecure attachment and just the way that your own mind filters out information is what leads to what version of personality disorder you end up having.
Yeah.
Don't forget dependent.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like schizoid, that was likely in an avoidant one in the beginning. And now I just grew up and now I'm like, hey, whatever. I don't care about people. I'm good being by myself and I don't need anybody. But now I don't need anybody in a like, I'm going to be independent kind of way. Like I don't need anybody because like legit, I just don't need anybody.
Because I ain't had nobody.
Right.
What is that?
Exactly. So to add on to that, I would say the personality categories.
Yeah.
I agree.
How about that?
Now, for everybody who is not necessarily trying to get diagnosis-wise, other things would be self-esteem, confidence, resiliency. And resiliency is your ability to bounce back from things that end up happening to you. What else are kind of some non-diagnosable things?
Type A personality.
Perfectionism. Which is type A.
Yeah.
A symptom.
Yeah. Also imposter syndrome. We've talked about that before and how that kind of shows up. That typically is an attachment issue, ambivalent or disorganized.
Basically, everything that we have going on with us,
right? Okay,
linked to that
is linked to attachment. Honestly,
if you live and walking and breathing, you have an attachment style.
Yes,
it's just which one do you have? But yeah, other non-clinical, I would also say is laziness.
Okay. Expound
on laziness. So if you have a parent that has either overdone for you, so we've been talking about parents that underdo, but you can have a parent that helicopters and overdoes. So then that leads to you not being productive in your own self because you haven't learned or been pushed to be productive. So that's still an insecure attachment because they're doing too much for you. So then that can lead to a lack of productivity with self
and or entitlement.
That too.
You don't have autonomy.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like that
one. A little razzle dazzle in there on the end.
Let's sprinkle like Trish say, sprinkle a little.
Okay. All right. Do y'all have anything else or?
I think that's all I got.
Is there anything that we can offer those who are caring for children as far as like how to better help them with their attachment or how to show up better while they are parenting?
If I had to say off the dome, patience. Showing children patience. we a lot of times forget that we were once children and don't know how to do things. Children don't know what in the world the difference is between angry and sad and scared and confused. And they don't know the differences between all of these feelings. They just know they feel something. Mm-hmm. And it is up to you to be patient with them so that they can learn how each feeling starts taking its own lane. Mm-hmm. But when they're little, it's all one big thing. Mm-hmm. It's just one internal feeling. So if I had to say immediately, it would be patience.
And I would say to parent your children or child based on what they need, not what you feel like giving them.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen.
Mm-hmm. I think the only thing that I would add is don't be afraid or too prideful to educate yourself on parenting. Mm-hmm. Like we always say, kids don't come with the manual. Lord knows we need it. But you need to go and get the information that you need in order to be the best version of what they need.
Mm-hmm. And if you're not one of those parents that's affectionate and your child needs that affection, find someone in your life that can be positive in their life that can give them that affection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's okay to remember that you can't be all things.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, right? Mm-hmm. That you can't be all things, and you don't need to be all things to them. Mm-hmm. Nope. As we've already said, you develop attachments with many different people. Mm-hmm. So I completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. On if you're not an emotionally available person, make sure your child has people that are. Mm-hmm. 100% agree. Okay, well, y'all know we normally end off with a quote.
This quote comes from Andy Smithson, and it reads, "The sign of great parenting is not the child's behavior. The sign of truly great parenting is the parent's behavior."
Must be this volume control. So, okay, interns, process your notes. Be sure to catch us next session and find us on all major platforms at the RePsychled Podcast.
If you're a new intern, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share.
Thanks for listening. And remember, we are shifting and reshaping our psyche through healing conversations and connections, one discussion at a time.